Roman Catholicism today teaches that the Apostle Peter was the first pope. This false teaching really finds its beginning back in the 5th century AD. Let's examine this claim, starting with the passage of Scripture commonly used to promote this teaching. Let's go to Matthew chapter 16, beginning in verse 13. When Jesus came into the coasts of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And they said, "Some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremias, or one of the prophets." He saith unto them, "But whom say ye that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered and said unto him, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." The Roman Church uses Matthew 16 to support its idea that Peter was made pope by Christ. Peter is supposed to have been declared the rock of the church, so the successors of Peter, so-called, the popes, form the foundation of the universal church for all ages. But it is Christ, not Peter, who is the rock upon which the church is built. In Matthew 16:18, Peter is called Petros, which means a stone, a rock, but a small rock. The type of rock or stone that you could hold in your hand. John 1:42 illustrates this. "And he brought him to Jesus, and when Jesus beheld him, he said, Thou art Simon, the son of Jonah. Thou shalt be called Cephas," which is by interpretation a stone. The same types of stones that when the Pharisees would want to kill Jesus or Stephen or one of the other disciples, they would pick up stones to stone them. That is what this word Cephas is referring to. Cephas is the Aramaic equivalent of Petros, which means a little rock or a stone. However, the rock on which the church is built is Petra. Upon this rock, that is Petra. You know, like the name of my favorite 80s hair metal band. Not. But Petra refers to a foundation, a rocky ground, something that's solid and that you can build upon. That's that word Petra. That is Jesus Christ. Like the wise man who built his house upon the rock. Like Christ, the solid rock on which I stand. A foundation that you can stand upon. This is Jesus Christ alone. It is blasphemous to call a mere man the foundation of Christ's church. The church is not built upon the person of Peter, but on the testimony of Peter, that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, which was the context of this whole passage. "Whom say ye that I am?" And that was Peter's response, and it was the right answer, because Jesus Christ is the foundation and the head of the church. Using the same passage, Matthew 16, the Catholic Church claims that Peter was given the keys to the kingdom, and that he has the power to open and shut salvation to whomsoever he will, and that whatever the Pope binds on earth is bound in heaven. This is signified in the papal coat of arms. If you ever see it, it's a crown with double keys. The crown signifies his authority in heaven and earth. The silver key signifies the Pope's power on earth, and the golden key signifies his power in heaven. The cord tying the keys together signifies the Pope's binding power. Yet, The keys of the kingdom of heaven were not given to Peter alone, but to all the disciples. The key that unlocks the door to forgiveness of sins and entrance into heaven is the gospel, which is the power of God to salvation, according to Romans 1:16. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. This is what opens or shuts the door of salvation. However, the lawyers, the Pharisees, were rebuked by Jesus for taking away the key of knowledge, referring to the knowledge of the gospel of salvation. Luke 11:52, Jesus says, "Woe unto you, lawyers, for ye have taken away the key of knowledge. Ye entered not in yourselves, and them that were entering in ye hindered." They had turned the law of God into a means of salvation by works, rather than a preparation for the salvation by grace alone. Peter used the key of the gospel of Christ's grace to open the door for the Jews on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, and to open the door of salvation to the Gentiles when he preached the gospel to Cornelius in Acts chapter 10. Beyond this, Peter had no special authority in the churches. Let's briefly contrast the Apostle Peter with the Pope. In Matthew 16, verses 22 and 23, we see two things. One, Peter rebuked Jesus, and Peter was called Satan by Jesus. Then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, "Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee." But he turned and said unto Peter, "Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men." So first of all, Peter rebuked Jesus, which is a very, very unpopish thing to do. And then Jesus turned to Peter and called him Satan and told him he was an offense unto him. Hypothetically speaking, if Peter was made the first pope here in Matthew chapter 16, this was a really, really bad first day of poping, which just goes to show you poping ain't easy. Also, Peter was publicly rebuked by Paul for his hypocrisy. Peter was behaving one way around the Gentiles, but treating them differently when the Jews were around. We don't have time to get into this whole situation, but we see how Peter himself was publicly rebuked by another apostle who, if Peter was the Pope, would have been an extremely inappropriate thing for Paul to do. Galatians 2, verses 11 and 14. "But when Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face, because he was to be blamed. But when I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said unto Peter before them all," and then it continues. But Paul is writing here, testifying of the occasion in which he had to rebuke Peter. We also see that Peter was married. He had a mother-in-law, whereas the popes were not allowed to marry. 1 Corinthians 9:5 tells us that Peter had a wife. Have we not power to lead about a sister, a wife, as well as other apostles, and as the brethren of the Lord, and Cephas? Matthew 8:14 says, "And when Jesus was come into Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother laid and sick of a fever." Peter also had no crown, no palace, no throne, and no treasury, in contrast to the office of the Pope. Peter was clearly not the first Pope. There is no evidence that Peter ever visited Rome. When Paul wrote to the church in Rome and greeted many of the members, he did not mention Peter. This would have been inexcusable if Peter had been the Pope. When comparing Peter with the popes, one thing is for sure. Peter does not smell like popery. Get it? Popery? Ha! Why are you not laughing at my dad joke?